and I will explain in a minute what the SEED project is. I'm also the policy counsel for the Employer Assistance Resource Network, EARN, on disability inclusion, where we develop, among other things, best promising and emerging practices for the outreach, recruitment, hiring, and retention of people with disabilities, both at the public and private sector. Next slide. I am here today on behalf of the SEED project. Now, SEED is a very unique project. Typically, you apply to the feds for money. The feds set out the goals and objectives for you. You have to show how you're achieving them. This is a totally different approach. This is an approach that is working with state intermediaries like the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Governors Association, the Council of State Governments, National Association of State Chief Administrators. So what we are is a resource to these agencies or state intermediaries who work more closely with you, but we also work directly with states like we're doing today in providing resources for you in ways to enhance the inclusion of people with disabilities. Next slide. So we are not here to advocate for anything. We are a resource. We do gap analysis. We share what your colleagues around the country are doing on similar issue, in this case, state as a model employer. We will draft legislation for you. We will draft regulations. We will help you write reports. We are here as a resource to help you do your job. And so when you say, if you say, what do you recommend? My answer will be, I will share with you what your colleagues around the country are doing. Here are a list of policy options. So I am not an advocate in this particular position. I am here as a resource. Next slide. And so let me share with you some of the things that we have done. One is the Work Matters report, where a bunch of state policymakers, executive branch and legislative branch, coming together with some policy experts, spent multiple days looking across the board on examples of policies to enhance the inclusion of people with disabilities. And the outgrowth of that in 2016 was the Work Matters report. And that report deals with things like state as a model employer, engaging the private sector, youth transition, stay at work, return to work, state agency services and supports collaboration and coordination, employment first, sub-minimum wage legislation. In addition, telecommunications and disability-owned businesses are some of the broad topics that are covered by Work Matters. But as I said, we finished in 2016. So what we do literally every month is we update what states are doing. So at this point in time, as of September 30th, I can tell you since 2016, which bills were enacted dealing with state as a model employer, for example. And I can tell you what bills are currently pending. We also look at executive orders, both with respect to Work Matters and as well as COVID. And so we can tell you, as of yesterday, I updated the executive order, exactly what your colleagues are doing on any topic. And so you can ask me, Bobby, we're looking at developing or improving our fast track hiring authority, Rule 22, what is it? ACE 22, the fast track hiring authority. And you can ask us a question, what have your colleagues around the country done with respect to fast track hiring authority? I can tell you what bills were enacted recently. I can tell you historically what states have been doing, and we can tell you what bills are pending. And we've done similar things with stay at work, return to work for those who are ill or injured on the job or off the job, the future of the work, where we get into the gig economy, we get into issues of technology, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, as well as apprenticeships. And then the DOL website on advancing in inclusion. Next slide, please. In addition, we, because of COVID, we focused specifically on COVID policy at the state and federal level in the employment context and how it applied to people with disabilities. So as a result of 3 convenings, we developed frameworks for and checklists for making sure that COVID policy was disability inclusive. This dealt with health and safety policy and health and safety plans to make sure that they were disability inclusive. We looked at vaccinations from a disability perspective. We looked at mental health issues, and we looked at workforce readiness. And these resources, again, are available. We update the federal policy every month, and we have our partners have developed, the Council of State Governments and NCSL have specific web pages dealing with COVID from a disability perspective. Next slide, please. Thanks. So today, I'm not going to do a presentation. What I hope this will be is a dialogue. I will take the topics. I have reviewed your executive order multiple times. I have reviewed your task force report from 2018. I have reviewed summary data about that has been submitted in the reports. I have reviewed about 5 or 6 plans to get a sense, agency plans to get a sense. So I have hopefully a context of what you all are doing. My goal is to have a dialogue and brainstorm if you want to think about additional ideas. Borrow and steal from your colleagues around the country in terms of what other states are doing on the same issue, and also what the federal government is doing. So from this, hopefully, we'll kind of talk in bullet form today, not spend 20 minutes on any topic, but if there's something that I say or a resource, say, Bobby, could you get us more information on? To me, that's the purpose of this next 45 minutes, is to see if there's anything that we can do for you to help facilitate your efforts in the state. And Bambi, I'm not sure who this went to, but in August, we sent to somebody in the state, or Lauren, a document, Status Model Employer Policy Brief dated August 21st, which includes links and descriptions of on the various topics under Status Model Employer from the report. Does anybody know who got that? Lauren, no. Ricky, no. Bambi?
You sent it on August 21st, you said?
Yes. No, August of 2021.
Okay. I may have received it. I'll have to go back and
But in
look.
other words, what we'll get it back to the task force to make sure, but that is basically a summary of everything I'm going to be saying. And it's an encyclopedia. It's not a novel. If you're interested in a particular topic, you can say, oh, I'm interested in Fast Track Hiring Authority to find out what Alaska and Illinois and Maryland are doing. They have well-established programs that have been in existence, and Alaska in particular is very much well used by the state agencies. I saw one of the issues in the report that your Fast Track program, there's a question of how many agencies are actually using it. So anyway.
Bobby, is that, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that
Sure. It's not
posted? Is it posted online somewhere where you can click on the links?
Yes.
Or is it only in printed format?
No, it's definitely, Work Matters is online from 2016, but the document that we gave you that was updated, in other words, we have all of what the states have done through August of 2021 in this document that you should have, somebody should have electronically, and we will make sure you all have it. And in it are links to every state, so that if we list Alaska, Maryland, Illinois, and Fast Track, there will be a link to their programs.
And my follow-up question is what they're using. Has the seed agency been able to look at trends and see if it's been effective?
No, see, we don't. What we do have for you, Lauren, for that answer is we can give you the key contacts in every state so that you can have an email and a phone number to find out implementation. Okay,
great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So the general topics that we'll focus on, again, I did this review based on your executive order, is we'll talk about some infrastructure and leadership issues, strategic plans, call them affirmative action, non-discrimination, but your strategic plans, there are things that maybe you could learn from other states and what they're doing, and also in progress reports. The Fast Track hiring system. We can talk about your program and what some of your colleagues are doing. Issues about current employees, stay at work, return to work, telework, reasonable accommodations, including what some states have established centralized accommodation funding for reasonable accommodations to increase the likelihood that the hiring manager will hire the most qualified person and not hire somebody based on the fact that they will have to personally pay for the assistive technology, for example, or the personal assistant service. Next slide. We'll talk about web accessibility, online systems, mobile apps, training managers, and personal assistant services. So those are the kind of the broad topics that are from Work Matters and are consistent with your executive order and the report. Next slide, please. So I don't have to tell you what your report is and your executive order, you know it by heart. So I just wanted to do this for posterity. Next slide. These are some of the major topics included in the annual report. Next slide, please. So let's start by the first topic, and then what I'm going to do basically is kind of give a 3 to 5 minute overview, and then let's talk about any ideas of particularly interest that you might like additional focus. What I saw in terms of your report, the task force report, was the oversight monitoring. One of the monitoring was of the fast track hiring authority. And one of the things that the report talks about is potential suggested revisions. So I will share with you some of what your colleagues are doing with respect to fast track hiring authority. In terms of annual goals, we can talk about that as well. The ongoing reporting to the governor. One of your colleagues brought up the issue, how often do you report? And the answer was basically annually. Well, in some other states, this is done quarterly. And the reason is the old adage, what gets measured and reported gets done. And if folks in the agencies know that the governor is going to be looking at this on a quarterly basis, and in terms of updates and progress, there's better chance that the folks that are accountable, the points of contacts, will be making sure that things happen, not just once a year, but on a regular basis. So that's what some other states are doing. They're doing quarterly and sometimes actual meetings with the governor. And that meeting with the governor is deemed by some to be the most significant, because when they know they have to meet with the governor on Wednesday, a month before that, they're going to start getting ready for that meeting. So anyways, those are some ideas of what others are doing. And I see that you have a Governor's Advisory Council on Disability Affairs, as well as an Employment First work group. And the question is, other states are looking at the various entities and figuring out how to come together and coordinate their efforts and have maybe meet on a regular basis. Again, I don't know if you're doing that or not, but other states, the state of Maryland has a secretary of the Department of Disability, so that the disability agenda, or perspective, I should say, is at the table at all cabinet meetings. Others, like you, have established task forces, and in some cases, those task forces are time limited. Sometimes they're ongoing. So that's the next slide. In terms of some of the ideas from your colleagues. So let's stop in terms of infrastructure. Other ideas that others have had is, and you've got the point of contact. And in the report, that was really addressed as a major strategy. Is that working? Do you have disability program managers? Do you have ADA coordinators? Do you have accessibility, web accessibility chief officers at various agencies? Do you have a chief accessibility officer as a whole? Do you have selective placement program coordinators who help on the day-to-day issues of help getting people to use the fast track hiring authority, come up with other outreach strategies. These are some of the ideas of what your colleagues have done with respect to infrastructure and leadership. Any questions, comments?
Hi, this is Jim Mitchell. I was wondering, the state of Louisiana sends back about half of the money it gets from federal rehab. We have other sources of money here that we can use to pay for accommodations. I really don't think most of the HR folks even are aware of a lot of that. And I'm just wondering if, we could come up with a better strategy for spending resources that we're basically sending back to the feds.
Yeah, well, one of the things, Jim, that you might think about doing is calling the Kentucky Rehab. They had a Work Matters state task force, and one of their recommendations was to increase the state resources for VR so that they wouldn't be sending the match back. And lo and behold, in the next year after the report, Kentucky came up with I think now that this was pre-COVID, because a lot of federal agencies are having really serious, state agencies are spending their money because of COVID. But Kentucky was able to get the state resources because the VR is the central player for employment of people with disabilities in a state, in particular, in a typical situation, in terms of helping with ADA compliance and understanding by private sector, by having pipelines, by being help in terms of other state agencies in terms of doing the training, learning how to do better outreach, recruitment, hiring, retention. And if you don't have and you're getting all this money and sending it back, the governor in Kentucky said, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If we have a task force that's designed to enhance employment, let's make that a top priority. So you might want to talk to folks in Kentucky about that.
Yeah, we're talking $30 million in
Well,
Louisiana.
was this year because of COVID or in previous years?
It was a year ago. And, I mean, that's a lot of money to put towards accommodations and things for, putting up an 80-20 match, right?
Yeah.
Putting up the 20%.
Yeah.
So 7 million brings you back 30 million.
Yeah, no, but that's why, again, Kentucky saw the same thing. And that was a recommendation, and it was acted on by the governor his budget to the state legislature.
Yeah, essentially,
So
there's no
my-
reason why we should be, not hiring someone because we can't accommodate them.
And to my knowledge, I don't know if we've in the past 20 years ever met our match.
Yeah.
Because
So-
I was being trained as a CRC, certified rehab counselor, and that was the first thing that we learned in rehab in Louisiana is, I guess.
Yeah.
Now,
But
Bobby,
that may be an issue for you all. And that's what other states have come up with. A number of states, where that was the case, that was a recommendation.
now, Bobby, do you
Yeah.
know if positions, if other positions were hired, if you may not know, but if that money can be used towards that,
Well,
or
again,
if
VR,
VR funds can only be used towards accommodations and things like that.
well, again, VR has additional missions, and their missions is to be, I'll use a broader phrase of change agents with respect to employers. So could they exactly how they would fund these would be something to explore through CSAVR, the Council of State Administrators of Vocational Rehab, in terms of their community of practice, and find out how others have done it. But the mission is beyond just serving individual clients. The customer is also the employer, which includes the state as an employer. So it would be that would be something through the CSAVR community of practice to learn how others have done it. Next,
This is,
sure.
yeah, this is Ken York with Louisiana Rehab Services. Let me just piggyback off of what Jim and Lauren have said about the match, about the federal funds that are available to Louisiana historically, because I don't want y'all to think that this is something that just happened within the past couple of years or so, but historically, we have not, the legislature has not allotted sufficient state funds in order to match all of the federal funds available. That has been the case for many years, It's just not really happened here in Louisiana. So it's not something that is just started, it's crossed administrations. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah. So again, you might want to talk to folks in Kentucky and get a better sense of how they went about doing that. But that was one of their primary recommendations, because as was said, you get $8 for every $2. And so you have a whole lot of resources to accomplish a whole lot of things in terms of moving the needle forward for the employment of people with disabilities. Let me go to the next topic area, and I'm going to combine a bunch of things because they're related, and just throw it out and then open it for a conversation. The next broad topic is the annual plans and reports by agencies, which are mandated by your executive order. The point of contact designation of a resource person, very critical. Other states have asked the question, is that person doing 10 things? And this is one of them. Is the person qualified to do the disability? Is this their only responsibility? Or, and those are some of the kind of questions about this resource person. Is this person at the table when agencies are considering multiple issues, so that disability inclusion is part of the initial design of agency initiatives. In terms of you've identified paid internships and use of part-time jobs, job posting, job fairs as part of what would be in the plan. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Are we frozen?
I can hear you. I think Bambi may be frozen.
Okay, well, let me keep. Okay, so here are some of what your colleagues around the countries are doing in terms of barrier analysis, establishment of comprehensive record keeping and reporting. But before I go to this, I want to go to the next slide and then deal with all of these at the same time. So the issue of goals. Again, you have identified 7%, but the executive order actually does not say 7%. It says reach parity with the percentage of working age people without disabilities in the state. Now I just see that Katya, who's with the Seed Project, is saying Montana is, can that come up again? Or Katya, if you're on, if you can share what you just posted before we go on.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. This is
Yeah, we
Katya.
can hear you. We can
Okay,
hear you.
I just, I know you were talking about funds and VR counselors, in Montana just, their legislator approved $22 million for ARPA funds to be used towards the employment of people with disabilities, and their VR office, they're taking $2 million of that to hire temporary counselors in VR to help with the backlog of, for, requests for VR services. So, yeah.
Mhm. Thank you, Katya. So we can put you in touch, Jim, with the folks in Montana and learn what they did. But again, part of the notion of strategic plans, reports, and setting goals. Your executive order, as you know, actually talks about parity with the percentage of working age people without disabilities in the state, as opposed to 7%. I saw in your report that on page 19 that you will recommend annual goals that will enable states to reach parity. So that 7% may or may not be a magic number. So next slide, please. Okay, so here are some examples of what your colleagues are doing. In Minnesota, they have 10%. In the federal government, they have 12% for reportable disabilities and 2% for those with the most significant disabilities. They call them targeted disabilities. And so a number of states, as well as the federal government, actually disaggregates because by salary responsibility. So for example, you might find that in a particular agency, they have met your 7%, but it's 0% or 1% at the higher levels. And the 7% are focused, if not exclusively, primarily at the entry level positions. So again, if you're going to have reporting consistent with the maximum, what gets measured and reported gets done, other states and other systems are disaggregating based on above and below a certain grade level or salary level. And they're also distinguishing between those with all disabilities and those with significant disabilities. For example, in the 5 or so agency reports I looked at under the heading of intellectual, there were few, if any, hires. So that might be a helpful thing in terms of targeting some of your strategies. The Employee Assistance Resource Network on Disability Inclusion has developed several guides on self-identification. That's a big issue because if you're using your surveys and you don't, folks are still not self-identifying based on the previous conversation, things are improving significantly because of each year, because of changes. One other strategy that folks are doing, I don't know if you have Disability Employee Resource Network or affinity groups on disability in some of your agencies, but to have people with disabilities in the various agencies saying, I'm doing this, you need to do it. It's anonymous, but our folks need to know how many there are so we can design our programs and we can improve our strategies. So that was another example of a best practice that EARN identified. So if we go back in terms of the last slide, in terms of record keeping and reporting. If you look at the federal government's strategic plan for disability and Section 501 affirmative action for federal agencies, and the new executive order by the Biden administration, Executive Order 14035, there are all kinds of ideas in terms of data and also strategies. But one of the issues is applicant flow. Do you see the differences? And you have some of this I saw in your report. How many people apply, how many people are deemed qualified, but then how many are hired? And it may well be at the third level is where the issue is. There's also reporting of how many people jobs were rescinded after there was a conditional offer of employment. How many demotions, how many terminations of people with disabilities. There was also the report, the record keeping also requires how many people were hired under the fast track hiring authority and how many were converted to traditional civil service. And also how many reasonable accommodation requests and how much time did it take to satisfy those. And in terms of reporting, it's similar. The reports themselves is how many people were hired under the fast track hiring authority, how many were converted, and what was some of the progress. So these are some of the ideas of what your colleagues are doing with respect to reports. And again, the reports start with red flags, which are the goals, barrier analysis, workforce analysis, action plans, and progress status reports. That's a typical, included in a typical plan. But let's start with the goals. Is the 7% working for you? Is that the right goal? Should it be 10? Should it be 12? The executive order, again, does not mention a number. It really talks about parity that will enable the state to reach parity with the percentage of working age people with disabilities in Louisiana.
So this is Bambi. Many of our agencies are already meeting higher than 7% based on our annual survey. So I could see that the 7% may be a low number as far as.
And 7% was the number used by the federal government for federal contractors doing business with the federal government. So again, if you're interested in looking at the goal, know that we have information in terms of what other systems are using in terms of the goal, particularly the disaggregation. So you know how you're doing. Are all the people with disabilities hired at the entry level or lowest levels? That's something else that you all may want to think about. Now, again, I reviewed a number of reports quickly from various agencies. And in terms of the reports, as you know, one report was 1 page long in terms of strategies, including state as a model employer in applications, contact with the rehab agency, and various trainings, and that was their strategic plan. Retention of initiative, training, designation of the contact persons, that was their plan. These plans are that are submitted are very cursory in compared to what a plan would be for the federal government or a lot of other agencies. So the question is, and in terms of the various strategies, are they inclusive, are they comprehensive? That's a question for you.
I had a question that was a little bit unrelated, Bobby. Do you know of any other states that have like a established procedure for requesting accommodations? Like every agency that's under this state, if they would report to one person instead of like the department head, like would it be an ADA coordinator or something? And that person that was knowledgeable, maybe of Jan and things like that, instead of their hiring manager, would maybe get with the hiring manager to do the accommodations. So that way they could get LRS involved. It's just, it seems a lot for the hiring manager to navigate.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Lauren. Yes. In other words, one of the strategies, if we fast forward and given the time, I'm going to kind of run through a bunch of different ideas that your colleagues have done in terms of best practices. But rather than use the PowerPoint, I'm just going to not worry about jumping backwards and forwards. Here you've got well, one of the strategies that are used is the concept of a centralized accommodation program. That includes two concepts: a centralized expert at an agency, and probably if you're going to have somebody at the state as a whole, which could be the VR agency. Serving that function that would be within their roles, potential roles. But also having a centralized accommodation fund, either for the state or for a particular agency. So a hiring manager could say, I've got two people, one who's qualified, both qualified. The person with the disabilities is absolutely the most qualified, but they need the system technology and it's expensive and we can't come out of our budget. Is there a way of setting a system at the agency as a whole or the state as a whole paying for the accommodation out of a special fund? And there are strategies that have done, and some states will say anything over 500, anything over 1,000, you pay and we'll reimburse you. Different strategies. There's that the federal government, that the Department of Defense, there used to be a CAP program, Centralized Computer Assistance Program. So all the technology that was available, that was out there, there was somebody who knew what it was. So if somebody in an agency wanted to know, they would have the best idea. So you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not doing something that's not going to work the most cost effective that we know is work. So they've pulled together all this information in one place. So that's another best practice policy that has been adopted by other agencies. Now your program, the Rule 22.8A, fast track hiring authority. I see it was amended in 2020 to allow somebody who's eligible for VR, not just VR client step. There's probation, but the policy is very brief. I don't know if there's an extensive standard operating procedures, but other states and the federal government in what's called Schedule A have a comprehensive program. And in the federal government, a number of agencies say we have in a job description, it says we provide reasonable accommodations. We're a model employer, and we also have fast track hiring authority that you may qualify for. But having somebody with this knowledge, having it be reported as part of the annual report. In other words, here are different strategies that your colleagues have adopted to increase the likelihood that these programs, that particular program will be used. You have additional mandatory interviews. Vermont says if somebody with a disability meets minimum qualifications, they will get an interview, not necessarily hired, but they will get an interview. You have issues in terms of at the federal government, we have something called the Workforce Recruitment Program, WRP. It's a special program for recent grads or those in school to get internships. And in some cases, these are paid for at the agency level so that the hiring manager is encouraged to use the approach. The contacts with disability career centers. Every university now has a disability career center where they deal with the reasonable accommodation requests and do other things. It's a point of contact for people with disabilities in terms of the pipeline. Personal assistance services is another big deal for those with significant disabilities who need assistance in dressing, in toileting, and eating. The federal government says that the ADA does not cover personal assistance services. This last slide. But the revised policies on affirmative action for federal agencies require that agencies pay for personal assistance services on the job. Because there are folks that without those will never be able to work if they don't have assistance in toileting and eating. So these are just a bunch of different examples of, and we have, and Katia can send in case you don't have it, we have a state as a model employer checklist where all these ideas are listed just as in one place so that you can say, oh, that's interesting. And if you want more information, you can say, Bobby, we want more information about PAS. We want more, maybe it's a centralized accommodation program, about hiring disability program managers, about fast track hiring authority. Delaware has a designated person for stay at work, return to work in the state level, so that any state agency who wants to develop a program, they go to an expert who, so then they're not reinventing the wheel. And so that's just another example. Telework policy, is it disability inclusive? A typical telework policy will have the first sentence will say telework is at the sole discretion of the manager, supervisor. Well, that's not exactly accurate because it's not at their sole discretion if it's a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. And so, but supervisors and managers may not know that and may not share that with their employees with disabilities. But we know under probably your reasonable accommodation policy that telework is an example. Now, Lauren, you asked a question earlier about reasonable accommodation. A number of states and the federal government has 20 things that must be in a reasonable accommodation policy developed by each agency. These are the minimum things to provide a degree of uniformity in terms of the policies. So that's kind of web accessibility. Are your online application systems, are they accessible? Is there a policy for web accessibility? Is there any oversight? At the federal government, there's been a policy for 15 years or more. But the last time the Justice Department did a review, they found half of the agencies were still not complying with the standards. Does a typical traditional procurement of technology have a requirement that what is procured be accessible so that you don't have to retrofit or provide additional accommodations because you didn't have an accessible website, your online systems, your mobile apps, your technology that you purchase? A number of states have updated their web accessibility requirements, the standards, and these methods of administration to increase implementation. And that's kind of a summary of the topics that your colleagues around the country are doing. And if you have any questions, Katya, who came on for a little bit, again, here's my email and phone number. And Nadia, are you on the call? If so, say hello. She's our key lead in the U.S. Department of Labor.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity today to present to you, and it's good to listen in. Thank you.
So again, provided a lot of possibilities. We are a resource. If in your next meeting you want more information before it on any of the topics, let us know and we will share. If you'd like us to come back on a different meeting on a different topic, we can certainly do. Caitlin just shared the checklist. Again, we can tell you as of yesterday what executive orders have been issued on COVID and disability, as well as work matters, in addition to legislation enacted and pending.
Can I talk about this accommodation issue that we've been sort of skirting around? You know, resources is an issue, but I think it's a huge issue, and it's unrealistic for us to expect either hiring managers or supervisors to know about accommodations. So, well, how do we fix that, right? In training, perhaps, we've talked about doing training for these folks. We identify the resources that they can go to. They don't need to know. They need to go find somebody that knows. You know, they can't know. You know, technology and accommodations change so fast,
right,
that it's hard even for the experts to keep up with it. You know, to assist that. And there's some other, you know, we've talked a lot about the hiring thing, but, you know, there are a lot of employees that become disabled while they're already a state employee.
exactly.
So early return to work, COEs, I don't know much. I've just heard about these things up in Washington State.
Oh, COE.
Centers for Occupational. Yeah, right.
COEs, yeah.
And
the
maybe we
state,
should be looking into some of that.
Jim, the stay at work, return to work toolkit has a whole description of state of Washington as a best practice, and then what other colleagues are doing. And it includes links to stay at work, return to work guides that have been developed by a number of states, which is kind of the low-hanging fruit. You can steal Maryland's guide and put the word Louisiana on it, and maybe achieve something that's short of Kobe and the comprehensive approach to stay at work, return to work in the state of Washington. So that toolkit provides all kinds of additional examples.
Unfortunately, it's been my observation that a lot of what's driven policy, and for that matter, legislation in Louisiana, has been, well, what's Texas doing? Or we got to be better than Mississippi, instead of trying to be creative and, figure out things for ourselves.
So we're here to help you do that, Jim. We're here to answer questions anytime. That's my cell number. If want more information, we can write policy briefs on any of the topics. But the other thing, Katya, I didn't see a note. Did you share the August 2021 State as a Model Employer policy brief that we did for Louisiana?
Hi, Bobby, it's Rachel. Yes, Bambi has that, so she can circulate it. It's after the call.
Okay, great. And again, circulated electronically, everything has hyperlinks to everything that we make reference to. And we've now gone 1 minute over our allotted time. And so I want to again thank you so much for the opportunity. And we're here electronically, by phone, or by any other way to help share so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and learn from your colleagues around the country.
Thank you so much. Also, as a person with a disability that's in employment as well. I appreciate it.
Take care. Have a great weekend and great rest of the day.
Ricky, I have a question before we leave. So with your new position, would you be a contact for hiring managers that are navigating accommodations, or are we not sure yet how that's going to work?
I will be a resource for the ADA coordinators, who should be the ones, handling these requests. And to Jim's point, we don't expect supervisors to be experts on reasonable accommodations. And I'm currently working on a sample policy that agencies can adopt, and it will clearly say, a request can be made to a supervisor or hiring manager, depending on the situation, if it's an applicant or an employee. But once that individual gets it, their responsibility is to report it to the ADA coordinator. Then that person is the one who manages the interactive process, evaluates the request, goes from there. Those individuals in each of those agencies are welcome and encouraged to contact me if they have questions, they want to brainstorm possible accommodation options. I've helped a couple of agencies so far that have had accommodation requests. Hey, am I on the right track? What do you think about this? They want this, but we're thinking that, and I've helped them through that process. I've helped them to craft letters and how to conduct the meetings. So yes, I'm definitely here as a resource, but I want to make sure that those requests are getting to the ADA coordinator. They're not staying with the supervisors. And as I mentioned before, one of the things that I am working on as well is to develop supervisory training. And that's going to be one of the key points in the supervisory training, is to recognize an ADA request, because an employee or an applicant may not say, hey, I need an ADA accommodation. So it's basically training supervisors on how to pick up on the cues of, hey, I have an employee that says they're having problems doing this particular duty of their job, and they mention they have a medical issue. Okay, let me recognize that as ADA. Let me go contact the ADA coordinator. So we do want to work on training those supervisors to recognize that and then punting it to the proper person.
Rick,
Okay, that's really
are
exciting
we-
that you're gonna be drafting a procedure, like a formal procedure. And then does the state have like a an internet type of thing where all of like the state policies for the employees are? Because maybe you could even make like a disability section of it, you know, where it's posted for the employee, so the employee knows this is what I do if I need a accommodation, you know, with the contact and things like that on it. And
Right.
maybe even written out the formal policy.
Part of the requirements of the ADA include having a designated ADA coordinator for each agency. And that information is supposed to be in their agency policy. And then the policy is supposed to be accessible to all employees and applicants. So it needs to be on their website, the public website, not just an intranet, but also posted like on bulletin boards and, you know, common areas within state buildings. So that way individuals do know who to contact at each agency. So if they have an issue, say at Department of Natural Resources, they, you know, want to come get a permit and they don't know who to talk to about how to get an accommodation, they should be able to find that policy on the website, locate that individual, get their name, phone number, email address, and know who to make that request to.
Ricky, are we tracking how much is being spent on the accommodations and who's spending that money?
Not currently, but that is another proposal that's out there right now that I'm working on to try to get some data collected and have some annual reporting function. So that's, you know, of course, I've only been in this job 2 months, so I keep saying a lot of this is in the infancy. I have a lot of great, you know, ideas, and I'm working several different projects at the same time. But that is one of the things that we're looking at, is to get some annual reporting from agencies about accommodation requests, the nature of the request, the type of, you know, request, was it approved, denied, and if it was approved, how much did it cost, things like that.
And I know we're over time, but just real quick, Ken may be able to help me with this question. I have a coworker who had a stroke and then she returned to work and was having difficulty, and she didn't know about LRS, but her manager came to me and asked me about it. So we had referred her. Part of it is like they had to enroll her and do the whole process. Is there a way that we think maybe the task force, if we have an opportunity to maybe revise policies for people that are currently on the job, to maybe fast track them in VR to be able to keep their job with accommodations, things like that? Because for her, it was important and she couldn't get them in time. So we just kind of figured things out around the office.
Yeah, you can certainly, why don't you give me a call and let's talk about that. And of course we have, in terms of the timelines and whatnot, that's kind of set by, well, at least that's kind of set by federal regulations, but we certainly want to try and to expedite those kinds of services where folk are, where their job is in jeopardy, you know, things like that. But, and certainly we need to communicate that to staff. But why don't you give me a holler and let's, and we can talk about that.
Okay, Bambi, is there anything else, or does anyone else have anything?
Nothing I could think of except, I'll send all the follow-up information this afternoon that we talked about, the PowerPoint presentation and the other documents we talked about. And while I know everyone's working on their report that's due October 31st, we also need to consider those things that were presented today, because if there's any type of legislation that we want to move forward, now is the time to figure that out. But, if we don't have that figured out by the end of the year, it's kind of, very difficult to get anything enacted if we need legislation for anything. So just wanted to throw that out there.
And would we bring it to the attention of the legislative committee? Or would we just talk about it amongst ourselves?
I mean, this task force has the ability to recommend and move forward on things.
Okay, thank you all for attending and have a great day.